What's up, guys? It's GTO Poker here for Drive HUD for our fourth video. Now, I wanted to talk about something that happens very common. In my past three videos, I've been looking at 3-bet pots, and while those are common, single raise pots are the most common spots in No Limit Hold'em, especially in 6 max. So I wanted to talk today about a button versus big blind spot where we are the button and we open and the big blind calls. Okay, first things first, let us look at our button opening ranges. So I have our trusty notepad and I laid out the action as follows. So here I have button opening anywhere from 2.5x to 3x, which I think is a standard button open. And I have the big blind calling. Now, what is a reasonable button opening range? Well, here is my range. We're going to be opening all suited aces, all suited kings, queen 5, jack 5, the suited 1-gappers, 2-gappers, even 3-gappers, all pocket pairs, and then I have the offsuit 1 or 2-gappers as 50%. So this comes to 622 combos, which is 46.9% of possible hands. I think raising anywhere from 45 to 50% is a reasonable button open, and we will be doing the same. So let's see what I have for the big blind defend. Well, as you know, I use a mixed polarized strategy that I copied from Peter Clark, and I will be defending with 474 combos, or 35.7% of hands. Now it is a mix with the suited hands, and then I have the hands that can flop better pairs as 100%, and then I have the suited offsuit aces, or the offsuit aces rather, as 50, and then deuces through 8s are 100%, and then 9s and 10s are at 50. Alright, so let's get into the action. That is our button versus big blind ranges. Go to Drive HUD, fold it around to me, which is 5 cent, 10 cent on True Poker, which is the winning poker network, WPN. And I open 3x on the button with 5-4 diamonds. Okay. Improving calls. Take a flop. Ace of clubs, queen of diamonds, 6 of hearts. Now, immediately, one thing you should notice. Is this flop better for the button or the big blind? And how do we figure out if it is better for the button or the big blind? Well, I ran a solve, and the way you figure this out is you look at the solve equity. So here we go into the equity, and the equity for player 2, which is button, is 54.92%. Now the equity for the big blind would be 45.08%. So immediately we know there's a 10% equity gap between button and big blind, which is huge. That's a huge equity gap. Now, why is that equity gap so large? Well, let's take a look at the flop. Ace, Queen, 6, Rainbow. Now let's think about what are our best hands. We can have aces. We can have queens. We can have ace, queen. We can have ace, king. We can have ace, jack. These are all hands that the big blind either will never have or will have at a very small frequency. So immediately we have more nutted hands. That means we will have an equity advantage in this particular hand. So now I ran different sizings for the button. We have the 1/3 sizing, which is the most popular among people, 33%, at 68.7% frequency. So immediately we know this is not a range C bet. Not a range C bet. Okay. But now let's look at the EV of 1/3 to my preferred sizing of 75. Pretty much the same, but the frequency goes down when the bet size goes up, as we've talked about in previous videos. So in this spot, the highest EV sizing is actually an overbet. Now it's only a 0.12 EV, or let's see, what is that? That is about a 3% edge or a 2% edge. So it's not a huge EV spike, but it's just something to note that 175% sizing is the highest EV sizing. So I chose to go with my preferred sizing, which is 75%. So let's see what happens on the flop. Alright, so I chose 75% sizing, and I should be betting at 40.6% frequency. Let's look at the range composition of bets and checks. Here we go. Now these hands are bet at 100% frequency. That's the first thing we need to realize. All of our aces, our ace king, our ace queen, all of our super strong hands are bet at 100% frequency. Top set, middle set, bottom set, two pair, top pair, top kicker, top pair, good kicker. And then we move down. Now hands like 9-8 suited, hands that don't have showdown value like 8-7 suited, with the backdoor flush draw, so we can continue on 10 more turns. Since if we have a hand like 8-7 of hearts, we can continue on 10 hearts, we can continue on 3 nines, we can continue on 3 fives, we can continue on 3 fours, and then also an 8 and a 7. But now let's go to 6x hands. This is an interesting thing. So our 6-5 suited is bet at 100% frequency. Let's look at the EV difference. A decent EV difference. But then let's look at a hand like King 6 suited, which is almost always checked at a near 89.6% of the time. So why is King 6 suited checked at almost 100% frequency, and why is 6-5 suited bet at almost 100% frequency? Well, let's get to the bottom of this little riddle. So we want sixes in both our betting and checking range. Why is that? Well, let's say we only checked our sixes. Then when we bet and a 6 comes on the turn, we never have a 6. So we'll have a range gap in our betting range, and therefore could be exploited potentially against stronger players. But let's say instead we always bet our sixes. Then if we check and a 6 comes on the turn, we never have a 6. So again, we have a range gap. So we have to bet some sixes and check other sixes. So how do we find a divide and the logical way of betting some sixes and checking other sixes? Well, let's say we have 6-5 suited, right? And I know this is a 100% frequency bet, but let's just say we go against GTO and check it. Let's say we check it on an ace queen 6 board and the turn comes a jack. Now our opponent bets. We have 6-5 suited, ace queen 6 jack. We have fourth pair, we have to fold. Okay, now let's say the turn comes to 10. Ace queen 6 10. We have 6-5 suited. Our opponent bets. We have fourth pair, we have to fold. Now let's go to king 6. Let's say we check with king 6. Now if the turn comes a jack, our opponent bets. Now we can call. Now we have an additional 4 outs plus a 6. So we net 9% equity. So we can continue on a jack turn. Now let's say a 10 comes. Ace queen 6 10. Our opponent bets. We can call again. So the point is that king 6 is less vulnerable, which means it can continue on more turns than 6-5. So 6-5 is incentivized to win right now. So we should be betting 6-5 because it benefits from taking the pot down right now, because it can't continue on that many turns. Whereas king 6 is a stronger hand and can continue on 8 more turn cards. So that's an important point. We will check with king 6 at 100% frequency, and we will bet 6-5 and 6-4 at 100% frequency. That's how you divide your sixes. Okay. Now let's look at hands that are checked at 100% frequency. Kings, always checked. Jacks, always checked. 10s, 9s, 8s, 7s. Weak aces, almost 100% frequency. So what you're noticing here is hands that have showdown value but can't improve on many turns are always checked. So let's say we have pocket 9s, which is always checked on an ace-queen-6 board, button versus BB, at 75% c-bet sizing. There are no good turns for 9s besides a 9. So we would rather keep the pot small and try to get the showdown with a hand that 1 has showdown value and 2 can't improve very often on the turn or river. So that's a very important point. So let's go back to the actual hand and see what I did. So I decided to bet 75% c-bet sizing, 48 cents into 65, and I get called. Alright, so before we go to the turn, let's see how I played with my 5-4 of diamonds. So 5-4 diamonds is bet at 80.5% frequency, which is almost a range bet. So I think I played that hand pretty well. Let's take a look at the EV difference. But you'll notice the EV difference is actually nothing. One's 1.92, one's 1.93. So it actually doesn't matter if you bet or check here. But I think exploitatively, you should be betting more often because you have such a range advantage on this board. But theoretically, it actually doesn't matter from an EV point of view. But I decided to bet, which I'll be doing at 80% of the time, and my opponent called. Okay, 4 of clubs on the turn. Interesting. So the first thing you want to do is think about, is this turn better for me or for my opponent? Let's go to the turn report. So I bet, he calls, turn report. Okay, we're player 2. Let's look at the EV of the turn card. The green boxes are good and the red boxes are bad. So the best turn card in the deck would be the 5 of clubs. Let's see what the turn was. 4 of clubs. So we're going to go down. There's 47 possible turns, and this is the 5th best turn. So this is the 5th best turn card in the deck. What does that mean? That means that we should be betting the turn at a higher frequency than checking, because our turn card was better for us. So let's plug in 4 clubs and see how often we bet with our range. Now we're betting with 58.9% of our range because the turn card was better for us than the big blind. Let's look at turn cards that are better for the button. Any 5, any 4, which is what came. Any 3, any 2, any 7. So we want to notice that we don't want hands or cards that connect with the board. All these cards, 5, 4, 3, 2, 7, they're disconnected. So no draws get there, not many 2 pairs. Since we have such a high range advantage and equity advantage on the flop, we want to continue that advantage on the turn. So the turn doesn't change anything, which is better for the button. So conversely, the worst cards for the button would be any queen, any ace, any 10, any jack, any king. Because those change the board texture and now change equities. So if a queen comes, there's a decent chance that your opponent would have trips. If an ace comes, likewise, a 10 or a jack or a king, he could have a straight, or he could have a pair and a straight draw. These change the equities. So since our equity advantage and EV advantage is so high on the flop, we don't want anything to change on the turn. That's why disconnected cards are better. So I did a little EV analysis, and in game, I actually realized that this 4 of clubs was better for us. So when our opponent checks to us, I actually overbet here. The pot is 161, and I bet 230, which is 143% sizing overbet. Now I ran some turn sizings because I wanted to make 100% sure that the overbet sizing is higher EV. So these are the sizings I ran. 75, it's a 2.92 EV with my exact holding, 5-4 diamonds. 100, 3. 125, 3.03. 150, which is around what I did, 3.06. 200, 3.19. Now you'll see the discrepancy of 2.92 and 3.19. It's around 0.3 EV, which is around 10% EV advantage. So you're netting 10%, you're netting 10 cents on the dollar if you're betting 200% sizing. So the way you determine whether you overbet the turn or not is, one, think about your equity and your EV on the flop. Does this flop benefit you or your opponent? Ace, Queen, 6. We have more netted hands. We have a 55% equity advantage to 45%. So betting here for a large sizing is good. Now the turn. The turn was a 4 of clubs. That's the 5th best turn card out of 47 turn cards. Again, advantage button. So convert. And going with the theme, we should be sizing up over pot when the turn card is better for us, and we have a flop equity advantage. So that's the equation for when to overbet. So I decided to overbet, and my opponent, just want to see something here. Let's see what the solver says. The solver says I should be betting 45% of the time, although this is only 75% sizing. But it still likes me betting at a higher frequency than checking, which is the important point. And I bet. He calls again. So now it's like, okay, well, I was bluffing the flop. Now I'm bluffing the turn because I recognize the turn is better for us. Our opponent calls. Now the river is a 6 of spades. So we bet 6 of spades. Okay. My opponent checks. Now, what do I do with my hand? Well, it says I should be betting here, which is actually, I did not bet here, but I should be betting. And why should I be betting? Well, think about it this way. If our opponent has an ace, he is put in a tough spot here because we're going to have all the ace kings and all the ace queens, and he's not. So he's going to be chopping a lot of the time at best. Let's see. So it says I should bet 53% of the time. I actually checked here because in-game, this was kind of an exploit. I thought that when the board pairs that your opponent is more likely to call. Now, theoretically, I should be betting this combo most of the time, but I did deviate slightly from GTO, and I want to show you the results of this. So I did end up checking here, and I do think betting is a decent option, but if you look at the EV, it is slightly higher EV to bet, but you're not going to get rich off this. The EV is 0.67. 0.68 versus 0.55. So either way, it's not a hugely advantageous spot. And it's even less advantageous with the other 5-4s. So I think betting and checking are both similar, and I think you can do that at a mixed frequency. But I want to go back to the actual hand. So I decide to check and take my limited showdown value, and my opponent shows Jack 10 of clubs. So let's look at it from my opponent's perspective. Did my opponent play this hand well? Well, let's go back. Let's go back to the flop. I bet he has Jack 10 of clubs. Let's see what Jack 10 of clubs does. I bet Jack 10 of clubs frequencies. Almost always calls. 46% of the time calls. Okay. Pre-flop can be a mix between 50-50, and he decided to call. Pre-flop. Turn, call. Okay. Check again. Let's see. He can donk lead. Oh, no. This is always checked. Okay. Then when I bet again, when he picks up a flush draw and he still has a gut shot, he should always call the turn. Okay. Now, on the river, he should look at the EV. The EV of betting is slightly higher than checking. So if my opponent was a robot, which he's not, he should be betting, donk betting his no showdown value hands here. But I can't really fault him for checking and giving up. Although it does say checking. Okay. Oh no, I'm reading the wrong thing. He should always check here. Okay. So my opponent played it fine, and I think I played it fine. But the main thing to take away here is that, one, we need to learn how to identify when to overbet. We overbet when, one, we have high equity on the flop, and two, when the turn is better for us. That's the equation to overbet. So in this spot, ace, queen, 6, we have a 55% equity advantage. The 4 is the 5th best card out of 47 cards. Overbet spot. As far as sizing, 2x pot is the highest EV sizing, but as long as we just remember that we should overbet in this spot, that's good enough. Because I think a lot of people get confused on why we should overbet or when we should overbet. The equation is equity advantage on the flop, turn card is better for us. Overbet. How we split our range up on the flop, we bet our weakest sixes and we check our strongest. Why is that? We check our strongest because we can continue on more turns, and we bet our weakest because we can't continue on more turns. So we're incentivized to win the pot now. So I thought this was just a little basic hand, single raise pot, button versus BB. But there's a lot of talking points, and I hope you guys did learn something. Because I certainly did. Alright, until next time, this is Doo Doo Poker for Drive Hut.